Welcome to the first edition of Game Over International for the Beijing Olympics. I am so excited for everybody to be tuning in here. I know that it's the first morning, so there's probably fewer than we'll have the rest of the way, but welcome to everyone who has tuned in. If you've stayed up all night, you're insane. And I mean, unless you're not in Canada or in Europe or something, and then it's not a big deal. But for those of us in Canada who stayed up all night, we're nuts, right? The first day is always the hardest one, but it's going to be fun. I'm going to welcome in my guest now, and it is Jared Book from Habs Eyes on the Prize and a veteran reporter on women's hockey. How's it going, Jared?
I'm good. I'm surprisingly good, considering the time. But yeah, I'm great.
Yeah, I feel like feel better than I look. I was like looking in the mirror, and my eyes was like, oh wow, okay, interesting. But yeah, so I feel like Team Canada, for the most part, got off on the best foot that they possibly could have. Absolutely blitzing the Swiss team, despite the fact that they didn't really have much pressure put on the goaltender. Debian made a fantastic windmill save, I believe, in the second period there. So there's a lot of positives to pick out. I think the biggest one, obviously, is Sarah Fillier, who scored the first two goals of the game and announced herself on the international stage in an incredible fashion.
Yeah, there were high expectations for her. Especially after the World Championships as well. She's one of I think only two or three NCAA players on this team. So one of the youngest players on the team, and yeah, if you didn't know who she was a week ago or even a day ago, you definitely know who she is now. And that was a performance that Canada really needed, because there was always questions about secondary scoring. There always is when it comes to Canada. And I think, you look at the score 12-1. Yeah, it's a bigger score than normal, especially against Switzerland, who's normally pretty stingy, like they are in men's hockey. And it was a great game because of not only the score itself and how they played, but who produced. And Sarah Fillier is really announcing herself. I don't know if she's necessarily going to be like the number one center the rest of the way for Canada. I think that's still Marie-Philippe Poulin, but yeah, she definitely made a name for herself, and I'm excited to see how she progresses from what was a fantastic debut.
Yeah, absolutely. And that line really carried the day for Canada, especially at the beginning there when I don't want to say like things were dicey or anything, because I think everybody knows that coming into this game, it was incredibly unlikely that Team Canada was going to lose, right? But when the game was potentially still up for grabs, it was that line that carried the day. And, Natalie Spooner making things difficult for the opposing team, as she always does. And like you mentioned about Sarah Fillier, if you haven't known her name, by the end of this tournament, she is going to be a household name. And I don't think that's going to change for a very, very long time. It's very apparent that she is, I believe, before heading into the tournament, even I was reading about her and people saying like she's like the next one kind of thing. So
Yeah.
this is a name that we're going to be talking about a lot. Marie-Philippe Poulin, I thought played really well, but obviously wasn't the offensive force that drove the bus in this game. But I think lots of positives to take from her play as well.
Yeah, listen, it's kind of weird that we're talking about a 12-1 win and Mac Play had one assist.
That is
But
weird.
but like, she has this knack, and it's something that I've rarely seen in a hockey player. And obviously, you can say I have a lot of things she does, but one of the things she does is that she doesn't look like she's playing well. And then you look at the leading scorers, and she's top five, and you're like, oh, she hasn't even been playing that well. Like, I haven't noticed her being outstanding, and she's top five in scoring, and and that's just the kind of player she is. And then when she really turns it on, usually in overtime or in big games, when she does that, that is when it really becomes next level. So like, she has this knack of being outstanding even when she doesn't look like she's playing outstanding, and you just know that she has that other level to her game. And yeah, I mean, she played much better than one assist would tell you in that game. And I think that what's going to happen is basically, if you try and shut her down, that's going to open things up for the Fillier line. And if you try and shut down Fillier, then oh, sorry, you have Malcolm the Plank coming
Yeah.
down on the next shift. So, teams that don't have the depth necessarily of Canada and the US and even maybe even Finland, but the thing is you're gonna have to pick your poison. And that's the issue a lot of teams are going to have, especially a team like Switzerland, right? Like if you play Mueller and Stalder against the Poulain line, and then that opens things up for everyone else.
Yeah, and Mueller had a bit of a struggle game, not necessarily on her, obviously, because it's tough to punch up against Team Canada, against Team USA. Like this is still very much a work in progress for like the next rung of teams, right?
Mm.
But speaking of depth, that depth for Canada now matters more. I don't think we have an injury update as of yet, but Melodie Daoust fell going into the boards. Looked like she smacked her head on the ice and labored big time getting off the ice. Missed the rest of the game. Seems like she might be out for a bit, and she is an incredibly important player for Team Canada. So this depth scoring they've seen in the first game is going to be extremely important to carry them through to the gold medal if they, manage to win this year. If Daoust is out long term.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Fillier, we mentioned Spooner. The other person who was on that line in the first, 30 minutes of the game was Melody Daou. And I was thinking to myself, watching it, I'm like, this is gonna make people think she's not just a player who plays with Marie-Philippe Poulin, because that's been the kind of knock on her. She was the MVP of the 2018 Olympics, but I don't think many people recognize her as one of the top players in the world, especially the casual viewers. Up until 2020 2019, sorry, she didn't play in a world championship because she's had horrible injury luck. And here we are again talking about horrible injury luck. And I should stop thinking that this is her coming, like this is a big event for her, because I remember the last time I was like, wow, she's like literally one of the top 5 players in the world. She suffered a knee injury when she was playing for the Canadiens back in 2019. So 2018, it's just a tough blow. It could have been her shoulder as well. She was kind of laboring. So, the good news is it's the first game in a tournament. So if it is an injury, she has some time to work back. But the good news is that Canada does have, secondary scoring. We're talking about Blair Turnbull, who had 2 goals, 2 assists. Jamie Lee Rattray played under 10 minutes somehow. So, the good news for Canada is that they have the ability to shoulder the load, but Switzerland is not the game that you need your all 4 lines to go. That's going to come when you play Finland, US, and teams like that. So it's I hope that she comes back, because she's, not only her, but all these players have worked 4 years to get to this moment. They've barely played in the last 2 years because of COVID. So it's a tough moment to go out in your first game. But the good news is she has shown the ability to bounce back from injuries throughout her entire career.
Yeah, and they do have a bit of time before the quarterfinals and the actual knockout stage. So it's
Yes,
not like they
exactly.
necessarily need Melody Daoust until they get to that point. And then yes, they definitely would like to have her in the lineup. But for right now, she can
Yeah.
heal and recover a little bit, and hopefully she can come back when the games start to be very important. You mentioned Jamie Lee Rattray. Obviously, she was the first guest ever on the Noxie and Cax show on SDPN here, and I think both Karel Amard and Liz Knox, who Liz Knox is going to be on the show on Monday, they mentioned that they thought Jamie Lee deserved a lot more ice time in the World Championships that she played in. And now we see again under 10 minutes for Jamie Lee Rattray, even with an injury. And despite that, had a great showing again. What's going on here? Like, can we explain this for people who don't know the dynamics of this Canadian
Yeah.
women's hockey team?
I can explain the dynamics. I don't know if I can explain the logic, but look, Jamie Lee Rattray's performance when she plays under 10 minutes has become her curse, because I think that what's happening is that Team Canada has decided that, hey, we can play her under 10 minutes a game, and every shift she has a scoring chance. That's incredible. Nobody else can do that. So so they don't give her a regular shift. And I think that that's just the way that she's kind of been this the decided 13 forward. Like it's weird because I was looking at, you look at roster projections, and there are people that had her as a lock as a 13 forward before they had locks for the third and fourth lines. So it just seems that they've decided, and I don't even think it's guessing or even like joking. I think that they've literally decided that she is the player they can play under 10 minutes, and they know they can get something from her. And that's what they've decided to do. It's incredible that we're talking about a game where Melodie Daoust left in the game in the second period, and she still didn't have 10 minutes. It was a 12-1 game. Why aren't you playing her more? Like it just it makes no sense. And I accept to think that that's the role that they wanted to play. And going back to 2019 World Championships, they lost Blair Turnbull in I think it was the semifinal against Finland that they lost, and they lost her in that game. And then instead of playing double shifting a center, they just refused to play the fourth line and went with three lines. And guess who's on that fourth line? Jamie Lee Rattray. She scored a goal in the first period of that game and played, I think, 3 shifts the rest of the way. This is an ongoing story, and I don't know how to explain it except that that's what she does well. You give her 9 minutes a game, and those are going to be the best 9 minutes she can give you. And I don't know. I don't know if they rearrange the lineup maybe a little bit for a game where they're not winning 12-1, and maybe that's kind of playing Emma Malte, a player who's making her Olympic debut. Maybe that was part of the reasoning as well. But yeah, I'm going to keep one eye on Jamie Lee Rattray's time on ice for the rest of this tournament, because that I don't know. She's great. Look at the goal that she set up for Blair Turnbull, right? She great forecheck, hard on the puck, creating turnover, centering to play, and yeah, under 10 minutes in a 12-1 game. I don't know.
It's a weird one, but it's kind of like that kind of backwards Hockey Canada stuff that like, oh, well, this person's
Yeah.
really good at this thing, so we're going to play players that aren't as good as them over them because they can't play in this limited role the way she can. And it's like, but you could just elevate the person who's playing great.
Yeah. They do it all the time, right? They have the choice of all the best players in Canada at the men's level, at the world junior level, at the women's level, and they choose to have a fourth line that's just fourth liners or players that play that defensive role. And in a tournament like this, it kind of makes sense. But I mean, look, I still have like PTSD from 2018 Olympics, where it was an overtime game with a 20-minute overtime, and they literally played 3 defenders. And you have the choice to take 6 defenders for Team Canada, and you don't play 4, 5, and 6. And it's poor Laura Fortino probably still recovering from that game. I'm sure she had 40 minutes in that game. But yeah, it's just I don't understand. I think that they try and get too cute and not take the best players. And at least this time you can make the argument they took the best players, but I mean, they have Victoria Bach on the taxi squad. So I don't know. But Jamie Lee Rattray is great. and I think that she's finally getting a stage, and yeah, we're still talking about her not getting ice time somehow.
Yeah, hopefully that changes throughout the tournament and we get to see a little bit more of let's say, I don't want to like say that anybody doesn't deserve it, but I think Jamie Lee
that's the thing.
Definitely does deserve a little bit more ice time here.
Yeah.
And I think she brings something that not a lot of players can match, like with her physicality, and I really enjoy watching her play. So let's see more of that. Obviously, Team Canada's women play a lot in the next few days here. I believe they have like 3 games in the next 5 days, which is crazy. They like start this women's tournament and they like pack all the games together. Then they have like this big break before the quarterfinals, which like I guess, but interesting scheduling from the Olympics here. But there really is no big challenge for Team Canada until the Team USA game, which is obviously something that everyone's going to be very excited about. But this is a team that you want to basically see keep on doing this. Are you concerned at all that they did give up the goal or that they got into penalty trouble in this one?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, look, officiating is always going to be questionable. Look, the women's hockey, even more than men's hockey, has so much to the referee's discretion just because of the contact, right? Like the whole knock on women's hockey is that there's a body checking penalty or a body contact penalty, and every referee calls that differently. Like there's no rule in men's hockey like that is so arbitrary from game to game. Like, you have referees that let things go. Obviously, in the playoffs, they let things go. Less hooking, less holding. But women's hockey is like, okay, is that going to be a hit? And so there's always this feeling out process, and it changes from game to game. And players are used to it, right? They're used to like feeling out you see it at the men's game in the Olympics where international hockey is just different. World Junior, same thing. And I think that women's hockey is just used to that because one game to the next, you could have one referee who calls every contact, one referee who doesn't, and you have to adjust. So it doesn't really concern me. It's their first game in a really long time too, so there's going to be these kind of like flat-footed penalties. But no, Canada is going to get penalties. It's just the way they play. It's kind of a double-edged sword, but no, it doesn't really worry me. Especially Switzerland's power play is really good, right? You have two of the top 10 players in the world on the power play. They're going to score some goals. So yeah, it doesn't really concern me, but obviously something they need to get rid of. I mean, you go back to World Championships and they took penalties all the time in that tournament. So yeah, it's they call it the power kill with Blair Trimble and Emily Clark, and yeah, they didn't get a shorthanded goal, but they could. So maybe that's what they're practicing.
Yeah, they're practicing the shorthanded goals, but taking extra shorthanded situations. Before we
Yeah.
move on from women's hockey, I do want to mention the two other games that already happened. Obviously, Czechia beat China, but China scored their first goal ever in the Olympics, which is a really cool story. It was a power play goal, actually a pretty sweet goal. So that's a fun story. And also Sweden was upset by Japan. So is Japan like sneaky good, or is Sweden a bit disappointing?
Sweden is a weird story for especially for people who follow men's hockey. They're not even in top division at Worlds. Like they were relegated a few years ago, so they have some issues, and their top players, on top of that, tested positive for COVID, didn't travel.
There you
So
go.
yeah, they have some issues. But no, Sweden in the women's hockey. I mean, even if you look at women's hockey, 2006 is probably the crowning achievement for any European nation at the Olympics, winning silver. But yeah, they have some trouble. They have some problems. So it's not as big as an upset as it may seem, especially coming from a men's perspective. But yeah, Japan is good too. They're probably probably top 7 in the world at this point, and Sweden is not.
All
So
right.
yeah, so that's something to keep an eye on because we haven't seen Sweden play top division in a long time because they haven't been in the top division at Worlds.
Interesting. Did not realize Sweden had fallen so far because, like you said, the silver medal, like that's kind of still what I associate Sweden with in women's
Right.
hockey, is like they were right there, right? So interesting and unfortunate for Sweden. All right, so also we're going to talk about the Canadian mixed doubles team for curling, because mixed doubles I think is like, I know it's a new event to 2018, but I kind of love it. It seems to like bring
It's so
some,
cool.
yeah, it brings a new dynamic to curling. It reminds me a little bit. Obviously, it's not as high tempo, but it reminds me of when they brought in like rugby sevens, and how that was like, wow, this changes everything. It's like super fun, and I really enjoyed watching some of that tonight while I was not sleeping. But unfortunately, Canada drew a very tough match for the first game, which was like, Canada is the reigning champion in terms of the Olympics in mixed doubles curling, but the reigning champion in terms of world championships is Great Britain. They won in 2021. So they faced Great Britain right off the hop, had a chance to win it, but couldn't do anything with the hammer at the end there, and lost 6-4. John Morris, who was half of the team that won in Pyeongchang, is playing with Rachel Homan, but he said that Rachel was fantastic, but he was not great in the game today. So they need to figure things out a little bit. And I think you had mentioned before we started here, Jared, that they haven't really been able to play with each other that much. So interesting to see how their chemistry will develop, because of how good or how much curling is about like planning together, and like essentially building something throughout each set, or whatever you'd like to call it.
Yeah.
But also, Canada lost their first game last Olympics, so not all over at this point.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have a mixed doubles trials at the Olympics. So I mean, it's such a different game that I think it might take some time to adjust to it. So yeah, I don't think you should count Canada out yet. I mean, obviously there's a playoff format and things like that as well. So losing one game does not mean too much, but obviously they do have to get their stuff together a little bit. But yeah, like you mentioned, they won gold last year despite losing their first game as well. So yeah, it's a tough road, but yeah, I mean, I don't think John Morris and Rachel Homan, I think, was like at 50 something percent. She's not going to curl 50 something percent very often. So yeah, I wouldn't count out that team yet.
No, absolutely not. And they are still maybe not the favorite, but they are a favorite for medaling. So
Yeah,
definitely
exactly.
something to pay attention to. I believe they have like 3 games over the next little bit here. So like curling, they really do pack in the games. You play a lot in a short period of time. Uh, Maybe not the most physically demanding sport, but I feel like the amount of focus it takes, like that's a lot to play like essentially 4 games in 2 days. But we there's not too much more to talk about there because there's so many more games coming, and it's going to be interesting to see how Canada rebounds there. But then we've got the women's moguls qualifying that I believe has finished now. Unfortunately, one of our girls, Chloe Dufour-Lapointe, did not qualify, but her younger sister Justine just barely did. It was a bit of an interesting thing. Like, obviously, we are not freestyle skiing experts, Jared, but from the run that I saw, it seemed like both the broadcasters and myself were pretty confused at the score that Justine got because it seemed like she had a pretty clean run and she just qualified in 10th. That's the highest spot of any of the Canadian women. Justine obviously won gold in Sochi and I believe silver in Pyeongchang. So a bit surprising of a result.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like judging at the Olympics is always is like often an issue, especially when it comes to Canadian women. But yeah, I think that you know there still is some hope for Chloe as well because I think there's a second qualifying round. I'm not a huge moguls expert, but I think that there's 2 chances that you get in. So I mean, it'll be
Yes.
interesting to watch. But obviously, you see them in 10th and 11th, and something went wrong because that's not usually how it goes for them. I know when I looked it up this morning, I was like, oh, that seems low for them. So yeah, I think that there's still hope, but obviously it's an event that Canada's kind of had a hand on for a long time ago, even going back to Jennifer Heil as well, right? So it's an event, obviously. Mikael Kingsbury on the men's side as well, right? So the sisters really made a name for themselves, I guess 8 years ago now, and they still have a chance to get on the podium.
Yeah, yeah, they were one of the best stories in Vancouver as well. I guess it was Vancouver when they really broke out, right? So, not Sochi.
No, Jen Heil was Vancouver. I think it was Sochi when they both medaled.
Was it? Okay.
Unless I think so.
Because Sochi
Honestly,
was
all the
when uh I'm drawing a blank on the name, but the before Mikhail Kingsbury, the first gold
Bilodeau.
medal on Canadian soil.
Yeah, Bilodeau was Vancouver.
Bilodeau, that's the one. Yes,
Yeah,
Alexandre Bilodeau. That
yeah,
was like the big thing.
yeah, exactly. And then Jen Heil won like a couple days later herself as well. So yeah, it was just that was Vancouver, and then I think in 2014 it was when the sisters both medaled.
Yes.
Um, and then Pyeongchang, I think one of them did, and one finished fourth or something. If I again my memory, I have like all the Olympics jumbled together. Like I was still referring to the last Olympics as Sochi like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's it's tough.
It's I think that the combination of the pandemic and then like the NHLers not going to the last Olympics and the last Olympics also being in uh in Asia where like the time zone is
Yeah.
so much different so you miss a lot of it. This you're obviously covering it. I'm going to be far more in it than the last time, but there's it's hard, like it's easy to misremember things and squish things together when it's all over the place in terms of time zones. The men's qualifying for men's moguls is coming up here in a few minutes, right after we close out our show. Obviously, Mikhail Kingsbury is a gold medal favorite in that event. These are events, as we mentioned, that are pretty important to Canada's medal hopes. So hopefully Mikhail doesn't get dinged, although it doesn't really matter as long as you qualify, right? Like that's the main thing. And there are 2 qualification rounds for moguls, so it's not end of the world if I mean, it would be an absolute shocker if Mikhail Kingsbury didn't qualify in the first one. I think that would be like a major controversy. But for Chloe Dufour-Lapointe, I think she has another chance here. So there's lots to look forward to. There's tons of events today. This is the day that the Olympics really do kick off in maybe not an official capacity.
One day before the opening ceremonies,
yes,
everything really kicks off.
yes, it's a weird structure, but we'll take it. It's still fun. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We're gonna wrap this one up a little bit early. We went a little bit quick today just because it's the first day. There's not as much to talk about as there will be the rest of the way through. Thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for tuning in this morning. And we hope to be with you every single day until the end of the Olympics, upon which time we will have a big wrap-up show. And if you love this, tune in tomorrow. And on the weekend, you'll have Omar White, Tic Tac Tomar from Twitter. He's going to be hosting for us, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you check out the SDPN shop, get some amazing Game Over merchandise, and download the SDPN app, because you can watch this show in any way you choose. You can listen to it on SDPN radio. There's all sorts of stuff, and I believe on the next episode, we're going to have some cross-platform ways where you can watch this show. It's not just going to be on YouTube Live, so it's going to be really fun. Stick with us for this whole thing. I'm excited for this show. I think it's going to be fantastic. And Jared, before we close things out, tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, haveseyesontheprize.com. Obviously, a little less focus on the Olympics at this time than usual. Probably should change that considering the state of the Canadians. But I mean, change it to eyes on the podium or something for the next couple of weeks. Maybe get some wins to talk about.
Yeah, no kidding. Watch a red team that actually scores some goals for once. Although I guess we didn't even mention it, but I gotta say I hate those black jerseys that Team Canada was wearing tonight. You can't read any of the names or numbers.
I don't know how they did it. They're calling the game on a monitor, and I couldn't see anything.
So, yeah, it was a play-by-play nightmare. Like, I think there was a few times where the play-by-play guy was like apologizing for like getting names wrong, or he would like be non-committal on who had the puck. Yeah. And it's like, I don't blame you, because I couldn't read anything on those jerseys. Like, it's just bad design.
Yeah.
I know they look kind of cool on the rack, but on the ice, terrible.
And close up, when they were showing warm up and the close up shots, they looked really cool. It looked like a really super bright red on the black, but then you zoom out and you're like, whoa.
Yeah,
it's not so good.
And for jersey designers, you have to keep broadcast in mind when you're creating this stuff, because we got to be able to see. It's the same as like the Oilers orange jerseys. You can't read them on the ice. Or even their dark blue jerseys are pretty terrible as well. Yeah. Like, you got to think of this.
Imagine there are fans. Like, how are they supposed to see it? Like, it's just not forget TV, forget announcers. The whole point of having numbers on jerseys is to tell who's who.
Yep. And especially in a situation like this where you really want to grow the game, you want everybody to know these women's names. You're making a barrier to that. So I hope this is the last time they wear those black jerseys, because I feel like the other two are better looking anyway. I have a big issue with how much Canada leans on black in their jerseys to begin with. In my opinion, it should just be red and white, but I'll leave it